these are the initial outputs that we can deliver. That's your open door. That's your ticket to those conversations to understand what's going to really resonate with your stakeholders, what's going to resonate with your team. So once you define the characteristics, then you kind of come to the purpose. What's the purpose of the COE? That's really then going to be the blueprint, if you will, for your payroll strategy.
Welcome to the Payroll Podcast, the show that explores the latest insights and innovations in the world of payroll. Today's sponsor is brought to you by Deel. That's Deel. Deel's the all-in-one global people platform built for all aspects of your global work, whether you're an enterprise business, a small company, or something in between. And now, Deel has commissioned Forrester Consulting to bring us the latest insights on the state of global payroll. Many of today's global payroll solutions are fragmented, they're costly and unreliable, which is leading to inconsistent employee experiences and a loss of talent. In fact, most businesses use over 6 platforms and tools just to pay their global teams. The solution? Well, a unified payroll solution that allows businesses to expand globally in a more seamless, compliant, and cost-effective way. Deel's fully managed global payroll makes it possible to pay your entire team in over 100 countries and over 200 currencies, all in one place. You can download the latest Forrester study now and explore how other areas of business are being affected by fragmented payroll systems, like financial planning, HR admin, employee experience, and more. And of course, why a unified global payroll platform like Deel can help. Click the link in the show notes to download the study. And thanks again to Deel, that's Deel, for sponsoring today's episode of the Payroll Podcast. Hello and welcome back to the Payroll Podcast. My name is Nick Day. I'm CEO at JGA Recruitment Group. We're specialist global payroll recruiters. And I'm also the host of this wonderful show where I bring you the best, the most influential payroll leaders operating in this space globally to help bring you some insights that can really help raise the profile of the industry for everyone. And today is absolutely no different. But before I give you an introduction, a little reminder for myself, if you have a moment to share this show with any of your payroll colleagues or friends, please do so. If you can leave us a review, that would be amazing. And don't forget as well to follow us on YouTube, where you can see these interviews live and in person as well. All of those things combined is really going to help us continue to raise the profile of payroll for everyone. Right, on to today's guest. And we've got a real special guest, someone that I've been in contact with for an awful long time. And I invited Angela Wagner, Vice President of Global Payroll at Pearson, to join me today to talk about her experience in the world of payroll, because she's led some really big teams. She's someone who's very results driven, and she's got some fantastic achievements, which I would love to share with all of you, our wonderful listeners today. For those not familiar, she's a highly respected and well-known thought leader and innovator in the global payroll space. And we know that payroll is going global more than it's ever done before. So we've got a real industry expert with us today to talk about how the world of payroll has started to change in relation to globalization, in relation to leadership, in relation to centers of excellence, and more. She's someone who's able to translate complex issues, and you're going to discover that during the course of today's show, into new possibilities that really showcase payroll's value. And that's something that we're all really passionate about, not just here on the Payroll Podcast, but I know you are too as our listeners. She lives near Memphis, so she's joining us today stateside. I'm here in the UK. She has a family and 3 dogs, so very similar setup to myself. And I'm looking forward to welcoming Angela to the show. So without further ado, Angela Wagner, welcome to the Payroll Podcast. How are you feeling?
Thank you so much, Nick. All is going great. And that was probably one of the best intros I've ever had. So that made my day. Thank you.
Fantastic. Every single word was absolutely worthy and due. I'm going to start though with my first question I ask all of my guests. I know you'll know what it's coming, and it's this. What does the word payroll mean to you?
Yes. You know what's so funny? I had to really put some thought into my response, because I could have gone the very, pragmatic route, but after reflecting on it a little bit, Nick, what it really means to me is livelihood. And that livelihood is so important on both the individual and societal level. So when you think about livelihood, at the individual level, it means being able to obtain your basic needs, right? Food, housing, It can be an enabling factor to the quality of life and well-being. And at the societal level, livelihood impacts economic growth and human capital development, which in turn feeds the economy. So all in, payroll is not just fulfilling the individual needs or carrying out a complex or compliance rather related task that an employer has to do. It is truly the backbone of global livelihood, which is essential for empowering individuals and driving progress around the world. So I appreciate you asking that question, because it really did give me a reason to kind of contemplate what does it actually mean.
I can tell. I think we'll just finish the show there. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Now I'm joking, but no, what a brilliant response. And you know what? We were speaking off air just before we started today's show, and I think that's I didn't know that was going to be your response, so full disclosure, but we were talking about what payroll's done for ourselves and our careers. And that's exactly how I see it. I'm not a payroll professional in per se, in the sense that I process payrolls, but payroll has been my industry since the day I left university. And I've been in that for 22, 23 years. It's been incredibly kind to me. And I know you were referring to it in a slightly different context, but it's certainly the livelihood for me that resonates. So wonderful way to start the show. And what a really well thought out response. So I love that.
We don't do this for free, right? Like I hope that we love what we do enough that maybe, we can do it for free at some point in our lives, but none of us does this for free, right? That's called volunteerism. So it's truly about livelihood.
Yeah, that's one of the things that hopefully this show does for people that listen, right? Is you can't just step into payroll and run something compliantly and successfully. There's an awful lot of intricacy and nuance and expertise and knowledge that's required. And people, I think, underestimate that outside of the industry. They don't realize just how much we need to know to manage the amount of data, compliance, complexity that's now thrust upon us. And we've got many of those new things being thrust upon us all the time, from legislation to global changes to systems to AI and everything else as well. Now, from your perspective, Andrew, you've had a huge amount of success transforming payroll functions into something which we've termed, and we've seen it as a term, certainly from your perspective, as the centers of excellence, which I love, because that really raises the profile of payroll anyway. What are the key steps involved in that process, and what kind of benefits have you seen as a result of moving functions into a center of excellence?
Yeah, so it wasn't until I got to Amazon, so that would have been in 2012, 2013, I think, when I got there. So just about 10, 11 years ago. It's been a minute. And they were going through this whole transformative journey to digitize all things, not just payroll, but across everything that touched hire to retire. And they didn't necessarily call the evolution, if you will, of payroll to becoming a center of excellence, but it sort of happened organically. And that's really where I got my first taste of what is a COE, what could it look like, what are the possibilities? And when you think about an organization as large as Amazon, right, hundreds of thousands of employees, probably almost 1 million employees at this point in time around the world, what could that look like? And that's a great use case for why a center of excellence might make sense for an organization of that size and scale. When I left Amazon, I went to work for an airline, much smaller organization, much smaller employee footprint, some international presence, but predominantly just based in the US. We had a small footprint in Canada and then eventually Mexico and Costa Rica. And the way that the industry operated and the size and scale of the airline was such that it didn't really make sense. So if you're thinking to yourself, do we need a COE? Does it make sense? Should I explore this? I would say the first thing you want to do is make the assessment. And so what are some of the things that you would do to assess? So I think, step one, assess, does the organization need a COE? So what would the organization gain from it? Are there gaps that could or would be filled if you stood up a center of excellence? Does having a COE perhaps fit into a broader enterprise strategy? Some organizations might not need one, right? Maybe you have one location, maybe you operate in one jurisdiction. do you have a small employee population? So there's just a lot of factors that should be considered first. You don't need to spend a great deal of time assessing if you need one, because I think as you fall into perhaps what we would call step 2, that's the definition. Define what it is a COE for payroll looks like. What's the purpose within the organization? What are those deliverables? What's the value that's going to be generated or gained by either evolving your current payroll practice to a COE and or creating a COE in addition to kind of the daily operations in terms of processing payroll and getting payroll completed. So once you define the characteristics, then you kind of come to the purpose. And so that purpose, what's the purpose of the COE? That's really then going to be the blueprint, if you will, for your payroll strategy. And that is something that is probably not a one and done. This is usually a multi-year journey in the context, Nick, of a really large multinational organization. You're probably looking at, how do I balance out, building out my payroll strategy and deploying or standing up a COE. And you can do those two things to some degree in parallel. What I found is when creating a COE or making that decision around, do we need it, should we, et cetera, it's really about filling the gaps, if there's some gaps to be filled, and there usually are. It's usually about creating standards that need to be applied in multiple jurisdictions or around the world. It's finding kind of what's the commonality that needs to knit all of the different payroll practices together. So if you're operating in, say, 60 different countries, what is it that you need to do to kind of pull things together? Do you want to centralize? Are you outsourced? Are you insourced? Are you offshored and nearshored and all of those good things? But I think as the COE is starting to be crafted in terms of what it is that we are going to deliver, I think one of the main things you're looking at is we want to standardize, we want to simplify, we want to make sure that we have robust controls so that we're mitigating risk. We're in a position to be proactive and diagnose any sort of risk. Maybe there's specific outputs that we need to deliver to the business that we're not doing today that could not only provide value, but is sort of a missing ingredient, perhaps, to certain areas across the business. So how you go about crafting what the outputs are for your COE, that's also then going to help shape and inform usually what your global payroll strategy is going to look like. And that whole journey, Nick, most likely is something that's going to take several years to kind of get up and running.
What are the key benefits the other side then? Because obviously it's a big journey, but you don't undertake something of that size and scale if there isn't a big, a pot or prize at the end of that, overall goals. What are some of the benefits of going through that work?
Yeah. So what I have found to be one of the key benefits is that you expose a lot of opportunity, and I don't mean that in a negative way, but as a new leader coming in to lead a global function, and you start sort of laying that foundation of what do I want the COE to be known for? What are the things we want to deliver? Part of the exercise is what are we not delivering today? What are the things we're not doing that we should be doing first and foremost? And then that also then kind of opens the door as you're having your conversations with your team and your stakeholders. Usually they will be very open around, it would be great if we could get A, B, and C on some sort of cyclical basis. Usually it's information or data. But that in and of itself, that sort of socialization around, hey, we're getting ready to stand up a COE. These are the initial outputs that we can deliver. That's your open door. That's your ticket to those conversations to understand what's going to really resonate with your stakeholders, what's going to resonate with your team. Sometimes when you come in and you start talking about evolving, transformation, some people get really excited about that and they're on board and they're all in. Others might be put into a bit of a threat state. And, you have to be able to find ways to get those individuals to come along on the journey. Usually they have some of the most innovative and creative ideas on how to do things differently and better, and what else could we deliver, and what are other services, and so on and so forth. But it takes a minute sometimes to get those individuals to get on board. But yeah, the value that you can generate from that usually is insights. The other thing that we're doing here at Pearson, it's not completely, I would say it's not fully baked, to use a phrase, but we're looking at what we call our compliance portfolio. And I know I think we've got a different topic of conversation perhaps around compliance. I say compliance is a team sport. Compliance is so broad. It's so big and it's so broad. And no singular person or team can really own compliance. You can kind of surgically say, it's employment, that's probably payroll, or it's this, that's probably corporate tax. But the worlds of compliance are overlapping so much that it's really difficult to say who really owns compliance. And so what we have done at our organization is we've stood up sort of an informal council, if you will, with different cross-divisional stakeholders. So we have representatives from corporate tax, of course, payroll, global mobility, benefits, and a couple other areas of the business. And we come together once a month. Initially, it was, let's just talk about what's going on, because each of our worlds overlap in some way, shape, or form. So really, it was initially a forum to just keep each other informed. What we found was that we have enough movement and enough growth and expansion happening across our organization that from a compliance standpoint, we really don't have a great way to sort of let the business know what are some guiding principles, what are some best practices. It's one thing to say we have a policy and the policy dictates a specific outcome, because every country is so different. The business needs look and feel very different. No two mergers or acquisitions are the same. And so we don't want to put forth some sort of policy where we end up tying our hands, or perhaps tying the business's hands, and we prohibit them from doing something that's really necessary, or could be really good for the enterprise. But rather than policy, what are some guiding principles? What are just some things we could put in front of our strategy partners, some of the business line finance partners and the like, to say, okay, we understand you're interested in going into this new country, or you want to expand in a specific region. These are just some of the principal things you need to think about in terms of, administrative cost and some additional points perhaps within due diligence that you want to think about. So when I say compliance, that compliance portfolio is really sitting within, right now, our team within payroll. As a COE, we're kind of the engine. So we have a couple of tools that we can pull in from where we're tracking and monitoring certain types of compliance related changes. Some of it's tax related, some of it's not. It could be about minimum wage requirement. It could be about specific types of reporting needs in different jurisdictions. And so that compliance portfolio is really kind of multidisciplinary in the sense that some of it's tax, some of it might not be tax, some might just be reporting. But our team is sort of that engine that is sort of shepherding in that information and then serving it up to this broader cross-divisional team, so that as we then kind of further that those recommendations and those guiding principles out to the business and to different stakeholders, everybody who's involved in that little council has the same information. And so we're presenting kind of a united front almost, if you will.
I remember reading, I was going to bring it up, and you've covered it brilliantly, because I've loved it when I read it. And you said out there, and I'll mention it again, that you describe compliance as a team sport. And I thought, yeah, it is a team sport. And I think there's often too much pressure put on payrolls as they're being the sole department responsible for all this global compliance. And of course, there are multiple stakeholders involved in that process. And the idea that you brought that kind of council together to recognize that, not only because it's a shared responsibility as a team sport, as you put it, but also we can lean on their levels of expertise and they can lean on ours. And then it becomes, as you say, a genuine team invested, activity that we're all taking some accountability for, we're working with to make sure it can be the best as it possibly can be. Something I was interested to ask, though, is there might be people, I think COEs are more established in the US than probably are in other parts of the world. So there'll be people listening to this saying, well, look, I'm always pushing on an agenda of process improvement. I'm always trying to evolve our operation. I would just call that a payroll operation that's constantly improving. What's the difference between that and a C of a center of excellence?
Yeah, I mean, every department, even if you're a department of one, right? My own opinion, you should always be thinking about, how do I make things better, faster, stronger? Are there cost saving opportunities? Can I save myself time? Is there some additional value I can add? So even as an individual contributor, I think there's a professional responsibility for you to sort of behave and have that kind of mindset. In terms of a COE, this sort of, at least from my education and understanding, it really sort of started within the software development space, to, rapidly kind of ideate and create new products and deploy, so it was one of those, I think it maybe predates kind of the idea of Scrum and agile practices. And in some organizations, a COE is truly cross-divisional. So you might have a merger and acquisition COE, and people who sit within that COE are representatives from tech, finance, human resources, different business lines, whatever that case may be, because the organization might be one that is kind of going back to using Amazon as an example. Their rapid growth and scale, some of that really occurred through acquisition, and you need to come up with a way to kind of wash, rinse, repeat when you're doing acquisitions at such a pace and at scale. And so, you had M&A COEs in some of the different markets that could go out and just rapidly, here's what it is, here's what it means to be acquired by our organization, and so on. So we've taken that kind of concept, if you will, of like, here's the governance, here's the structure, these are the standards with which we're going to operate, here's the expectation. And when you think about, for me, a COE and governance in some ways kind of go hand in hand. It's not to say that one supersedes the other. But in my mind, the COE, and you find COEs quite often in HR, right? When you think about total rewards, who typically sits in total, right? Comp, Ben, pension. And these are usually subject matter experts that have a finger on the pulse of the market, the industry, looking at best practices, and then bringing that back in and helping the business either pivot and adjust, or just finding kind of new and innovative ways to, take care of the employee population. Payroll's never really been part of that. And I think because for the longest time, payroll was looked at a transaction house, right? You're there to process payroll. I don't know about your team at your organization, Nick, but I can tell you that my team at Pearson spends very little time on clerical activities. So the idea that they are processing payroll, it's kind of antiquated in a way.
Hello, HR and people leaders. Are you not exhausted from the endless war for talent battle cries? I think it's time for a fresh approach, which is why at JGA Recruitment, we understand the real challenges you face in sourcing top HR talent. And guess what? We believe we have the solution. Our team is on a mission to revolutionize your hiring process, because we're not just recruiters. We're strategic partners dedicated to finding the best HR and people professionals who align perfectly with your company's vision and goals. Let's break the cycle of frustration together. Join forces with JJ Recruitment and experience the difference in hiring better talent faster. Don't let another day go by without taking action. Contact us today by visiting jgarecruitment.com to discover how we can transform your HR team. And here's a bonus. When you visit us, why not sign up for our weekly HR newsletter? Because it's packed with invaluable industry insights and more. We really hope you can revolutionize your HR department by working with JGA Recruitment. Contact us today. Well, it kind of links to the next question I want to ask you, actually, which is moving into probably a next step ahead, which is the world of AI and robotic process automation, or RPA. But actually, before I jump into that, there's something I really love about COEs and the way that you articulate it. And you touched upon this actually with your compliance example with the councils. is I think the future of payroll, and I love your mindset here. Now, this is absolutely genuine the way that I see it. The future of payroll has to be a world of collaboration. And we can't do it as an island. We can't do it on our own. We need the support of tax, HR, reward, Ben, whatever it is, to help us elevate the profile of the industry as a whole. Because we're finding now that the boundaries between what is payroll, what is HR, what is reward and benefit are blurring anyway. We're all utilizing data more intelligently, and they can support different areas. And one of the bits of advice I would give to payroll managers at the moment is, look, when was the last time you went to your IT director and asked them what their biggest challenges are, to understand if there's something within your data that might be able to support them with that challenge, and then replicated that across all the other stakeholders in their other functions? Because you might find you've got so much access to so much people data, to so many different processes, to compliance, and all these things that happen, that the information and the things that you're privy to could actually have a huge impact on helping other functions. And by return, the IT department might then be a little bit more willing to come and support you with, automating something or improving a process. And then we have this culture of collaboration, which I love. But linking that to where we're about to go next is, we're seeing AI, artificial intelligence, and robotic process automation, RPA, become more prevalent in payroll than ever before. We've seen generative language models come to the fore as well. With all those things in mind, with the idea of the culture of collaboration, council, COE, AI, what do you believe are going to be the skills currency of the future for payroll? What are the skills that people in payroll now should start to look to adapt and learn and develop in order to be future ready?
Yeah. One of the things that our leadership team and I are trying to, I think, help infuse across not just payroll, but across all of the kind of HR operations space, which is where payroll is seated within Pearson. And that is, how do we get future ready? And, I see specifically through the lens of payroll, you've kind of got these two distinct needs. One is, depending on the market you support, and this is all going to depend upon how the organization is structured and the team is structured and the like too. But, just taking Pearson as an example, we have a very big population in the United States. Second biggest population is in the UK. Third is India, Australia, Brazil. And then the list kind of goes on and on across 40 some odd different countries. In those bigger markets, it is very important that we have people that we have access to, most of them in-house, who are subject matter experts. They can tell you the tax laws, any sort of labor regulations, the whole gamut. And it's really important that we have those individuals, because they are the ones that are advising the business when they do want to come up with a new slick thing. What does that translate to? What are the pros and cons? What's the actual cost of implementing something like that in one of these markets? So being able to have that subject matter expertise is really important. Now, you might be part of an organization where, you don't have that expertise in-house, but being able to tap into that expertise is going to be incredibly important. Compliance and tax in particular. Nothing will damage an organization faster than if you get behind on the tax bill, right? Or you're out of compliance for something. So being able to have ready access to expertise is critical. It's not enough to just say, well, I just process the payroll, or I just look after this piece of the process. That's not going to be good enough. It just won't. You have to be able to articulate, what does correct look like? And correct meaning, are the taxes right? Are things filed appropriately? Is this classified appropriately? Are the right wages and deductions feeding into the right reports? We talk about data, right? Are we making sure that whatever it is we're ingesting to calculate through the big fancy machine that is the payroll system, is all of that output going out correct? It's one thing to pay the employee, right? That's table stakes. But all the behind the scenes, the data that's feeding your financial reports, all the data that's feeding your regulatory filings, is it right? You got to know that. And you can't just say, well, the vendor does that for us. That's not good enough, because the vendor is not going to be the one answering to the authorities. So you've got to be able to tap into that subject matter expertise. The other side of that then is the technical component. So I would say there's three areas. So the subject matter expertise, the technical piece. Technology is not going to go away. And so kind of leading into like generative AI and RPA and things of that nature, this technology is here to stay. And I read a quote somewhere, and I wish I knew where I read it. I'd give the person credit. But they made a comment about Sora and comparing and contrasting sort of like the realness that AI is starting to be able to produce. And they said, this is the worst that this technology will ever be. And I was like, that's powerful. This is the worst it's going to be. So, that really stuck with me. So you have to become a sponge and you have to get on the bus and really champion the use cases for these types of technologies. Read, listen to podcasts, watch YouTube videos, take classes, reach out to colleagues who are experts in this space and ask them for insights or for help. People want to help you. They want to give you their advice. So think very big. Think about all the what ifs and then backwards plan. And through that, I think that you will find just some really creative and innovative use cases of where you can apply these technologies. But I think initially, or early on, if you're not really familiar or if you've kind of shied away, understanding like, well, what's the difference? What's the difference between RPA? What does that acronym mean? And what's the difference between AI? And how are what are the different use cases that might be applicable to my organization? So I think you have to embrace it, because this is going to happen to you unless you control your own destiny. So this is a space that will continue to evolve. Things like robotics, things like AI, it's going to become more commonplace. I firmly believe, Nick, that things like ChatGPT, Microsoft Copilot, which on my personal computer, I've been able to kind of play around with that for a little bit. I think that these technologies are going to become sort of the Excel of the future. And what I mean by that is everybody knows Excel. We all use Excel. It's sort of the default, you just, put it in Excel and we'll do a thing. I think that whether it's Gen Z or I don't know if my kid's Gen Z, he's almost 14. So the people that are going to start entering the workforce over the next couple of years, Excel is going to be the dinosaur. Their default is going to be ChatGPT or something along those lines. And so these folks are going to work or be on teams with all of us. And so one, you got to make sure that you have the tech. Otherwise, they're going to think you're just a crazy workplace. And why on earth would they come and work for you if you're making them use Excel? So you've got to have the tech. You've got to understand how to appropriately use it. What are those use cases? Embrace it. Educate yourself. Anything that's going to help automate, streamline, ingest a ton of data and make rapid or give you rapid results so you can make decisions, anything like that, you have got to become comfortable with and not shy away from it. And, I feel very fortunate working for Pearson. We're an education company. And so we've really gravitated towards how do we infuse AI in our products? How are we using things like Microsoft Copilot? What are the different use cases across the entire business and our portfolio of products and services? How are we using it in our enabling functions like finance and HR? So we're already trying to get exposure and get people in all different areas of the organization familiar with what is the technology? How do I use it? Giving them opportunities to sort of touch it and feel it and play around with it, because really that's how they're going to become comfortable with it. And tapping into those individuals in the organization that are already focused on it and working on how to infuse it in your products, as you noted, right? Making friends with IT or making friends with some of these folks in these other departments. It doesn't hurt to have someone in payroll owe you a favor. So, it's a great symbiotic relationship, but we've got to be able to adapt to the new tech. We have to.
Yeah. I mean, there's a saying, there's owe a favor, not a fiver, right? And in the UK, but there's, I couldn't agree more. Like the only thing that's the only constant in this world is change, and payroll, we've seen that hit us massively, certainly post-pandemic, with a rapid rise and evolution of tech. Obviously, a lot of that's been powered by generative AI, and ChatGPT, as you say, is absolutely going to be the household item that people are using. We've got ChatGPT 5 around the corner. We started at 3, and there's things have started to move around. And I think you're absolutely right. There's an opportunity here, actually, to to be a leader in this space if you get to grips with it faster. And that's same with anything. I mean, even us at JJ Recruitment, myself, I'm going through I was in Texas 2 weeks ago doing my AI certifications. I've been studying for the last 6 months, and I went out to the US and met the people in the US who I think are slightly ahead of us in the UK on this space to make sure that I understand it and create my own GPTs and bots and robotics for our business and for our clients. Because if I don't understand it, I'll be outdated very, very quick in the world that we do. And talent acquisition is an area that can certainly be applied within. But I think also you mentioned something earlier in the show, which is that payroll used to be seen as this big transactional powerhouse. And something you've done throughout your career is big picture thinking and allowed your teams to think big as well. And anyone that's ever worked for you will say the same. Like, you're a big thinker and you're an enabler to help people upskill and improve and see things differently. And I think, if we change the way we look at things, the things we look at change. And at the moment, people are looking at payroll differently now for the first time. And we've got a chance now to grasp the nettle with AI, to continue to push that change in perception, change people's views, get people outside, other stakeholders to really see the strategic value they can bring. And yes, there's a bit of a cultural shift. We've got to break down silos to achieve it. And there's loads of challenges within all of that. But that's something that I know you've been able to do. So I wonder if you could share some of the strategies that you found effective, in particularly for fostering collaboration between payroll and other departments like HR and finance, like creating those councils that you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, so it's funny, we touched on centers of expertise or centers of excellence. And I would say reading just through different publications and listening to podcasts and things like that, there's a potential drawback sometimes when you have a COE. And sometimes the COE itself can create a silo because sometimes it's more about perhaps pushing a certain agenda. And that agenda could potentially be at odds with the needs of the broader organization. So, and that's not true everywhere, but that is something I think for people to be mindful of if you're going through kind of that assessment of, would we benefit from one? Would we not? What would be the output, et cetera? For me personally, I would say make sure that you kind of check yourself and make sure that you're not trying to drive your own agenda forward. It's truly about how do we better serve the business? And we all have egos, right? I know that I have done things in the past and I've had people call me out and go, is this really important to the business? No, it was important to me. So I think it's just something to be mindful of, right? But what's interesting about, though, breaking down silos, I think part of one of the things that is really helpful is model the behavior. And so trying to be as open and transparent about certain initiatives and feedback across all of the broader teams, right? This sets the tone that it's okay to talk about what's going on. In fact, people might even be appreciative of knowing what it is that you're working on. And a knock-on impact of that is you start to build trust and individuals start to feel safe discussing ideas. They start to feel safe with words like accountability. It doesn't quite seem like a dirty word.
That links to something I wanted to ask you. So sorry to interrupt, but I think this is part of the same thing I wanted to quiz with you with, really, which is there's a lot of people listening to this that are really aspiring to be the next great leader in the world of payroll. And I think you're starting to touch upon the things that make you a great leader, certainly in the modern world, which is things like establishing trust, like being accountable, like being more collaborative. I just wanted to interject here because I think they're the things that obviously enabled you to be very, very successful. Presumably, they're the same kind of qualities you'd pass on to others that want to raise their profile to the level that you have, Angela, working for big million employee type businesses, household names, setting up centers of excellence, doing these massive and amazing transformations. To do those things, though, it starts with the basics of things like trust and accountability, right? So what are the kind of qualities that you think are crucial for those listening to this now? They want to come away from the show and go, this is the quality I need to be a great leader for the future. What would that look like for you? How would you sum that up?
You got to be, I just kind of touched on something like I got checked, right? I was driving my own agenda and at the time I didn't even realize it. Be humble. Right? You got to be humble. And, depending on perhaps where you grew up, and I don't mean like as a little child necessarily, but where you grew up professionally, that can really influence how you show up in the workplace. And I share that because I started working when I was very young. And it was, I feel very old now. It was a different time. And I was sort of coached to not brag about what I did, and sort of made to feel like, well, go sit in the corner, do your job. Just, nobody wants to hear from you. And I kind of took that to heart for a long time. And if I made a mistake, I tried very quickly to fix it, and I didn't want anyone to know. And I just, I kind of kept my head down and moved ahead. And over the course of time, one of the things that I learned, and it took me working for, I think, a really emotionally intelligent leader who saw some potential in me to say, why don't you ask for help? Like, I see that you're working all kinds of crazy hours, and just like, you're one person. Are you doing the job of three? Like, do we need to get you help? And I was so afraid of either being found out as a fraud or that I wasn't good at what I did. I didn't want to speak up. I got to get all the work done. I got to get payroll done. I got to get it out the door. I got to get everybody paid. But it took working for a particular leader to make it okay for me to talk about the work. Like, what makes the work difficult? What do you like about it? And so opening the door to be comfortable talking about not only what wasn't working well, but what was working well. How do we capitalize on what's working well? And so that behavior really set the stage then for me, and kind of the next evolution of who I was as a professional. I had more confidence. It was okay for me to share an opinion. Even if other people didn't like it, I knew it's not me. They just don't like the idea. That's okay. Being able to separate, is it personal or is it not? But ultimately it's, for me, I think just being able to be humble and understand that you don't know everything. You're not going to know everything. You're not going to always have the best ideas. In fact, some of your ideas might outright suck. So being okay with people giving you feedback. And I think the only way that you can get there, Nick, is if you do that first, and you're very kind with your feedback, and you're very empathetic. And, it doesn't mean you have to be nice and sugarcoat things, but just being very transparent around, I really like that you did these things. I thought that worked really well. Doesn't mean that there's a negative thing to follow up, but being able to give people that feedback and creating that culture of like, it's okay to share what you're doing and why you're doing it. But sometimes that takes practice. And for me, I learned the hard way, like a lot of people, but it was, I got to be humble first and foremost, and recognize that I don't always know best. And, it's not about me. It's about the broader enterprise. The other side to that too is you got to be curious, because as you noted, the only thing that stays constant is change, right? So you have to be curious. The other thing too, and I had somebody just ask me this yesterday morning, like, if I'm trying to make a transition from being, say, like a manager to a director, or an individual contributor to a formal people leadership position, what are some of those characteristics or attribute? And one of the best pieces of advice I was given by somebody was lead with the enterprise. So don't lead with necessarily the project you're working on, or the department that you lead, or the team that you lead. Lead with the enterprise. What does this mean for the business? And that really resonated, but that helped me up my game in terms of having more commercial acumen and understanding what are the drivers within the industry, because it's not just about payroll, right? It's about all of the divisions working together to create and live our mission of adding a life to a lifetime of learning. It's not just payroll. It's not just finance. It's not just marketing. It's everybody.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And you must be an expert at being podcast guest. You must have this before, Angela, because somehow you've brought this entire conversation 360 here, but you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right in what you say, right? If we're going to become a strategic enterprise, that's the attitude, they're the skills that we need. We need to be humble for sure. We need to be, they always say the potential lives on the other side of fear. And if you don't lean into the fear, we'll never realize our potential, right? And I think that you articulated it really well, but you've got to be willing to make mistakes. There's an acronym that says fail is the first attempt in learning. But if we don't try, then we'll not succeed. And it's okay to fail as long as you're doing it with the enterprise in mind, as you put it. If you can framework it that way and the business knows that you're making these changes or these decisions for the betterment of your company and your organization, then actually you'll do it in a much more collaborative way anyway. And I think the humility piece I thought was lovely, and it sort of tapped into my coaching side of me, which I love anyway. But the idea that everyone is facing, because you mentioned a little bit of imposter syndrome, I think was the word you used, or felt like a fraud, I think was the word you used. And the idea that everyone's facing their own personal battles. We don't always know what they are. And it could be personal, it could be professional, but everyone's got a battle they're fighting, and whatever that is. So it doesn't cost anything to be kind. And if you're kind, it brings in the behavior of humility, and it allows you to bring your teams with you. And I think you've opened the door on this show to exactly the kind of amazing leader that you are. And it's no surprise to me you've got to the level that you have and why you're so respected in the industry. It's been an absolute privilege to have you on the show today, and I'm so glad you've joined me on the Payroll Podcast. So thank you for sharing your amazing payroll wisdom with us.
Happy to do it. I could talk about payroll and all things people experience and technology, and everybody knows I'm a little bit chatty. So anytime you want to chat about payroll, just let me know, and I'm happy to have it. But this was great. Thank you.
Well, we'll have to have you back on the show. I think there's more content here that we can squeeze from you to help our listeners. So let's do that. We'll give you a little bit of a break, but let's get you back on the show. We'll pick a subject and we'll deep dive, because it seems to me like you're going to be ahead of the curve anyway in the way that AI is going to be impacting the industry. So there's an element there, the collaboration piece, the breaking down of silos. I think there's a lot of information we can glean from your expertise. And as I have done for many a year, I'll continue to watch your career prosper and shine, and I'll enjoy your posts on LinkedIn as well. For those who don't follow, I will put Angela's LinkedIn profile in the show notes, because she's very active and there's some great content, and it's definitely someone you should be connecting with and following. So with your permission, I'll put that on the show notes so people can connect. Of course, thank you so much for sharing all of your invaluable insights with our listeners today. And of course, if you are a payroll leader listening to this and you need support with a payroll vacancy, whether it's the stateside, whether it's in the UK or in Europe, then please do get in touch with either myself or my team at jgarecruitment.com. We can support all payroll requirements, from administrative, operational, right through to technical implementation, sales, and more. So do let us know. That's it, really. I'm the host, Nick Day, and this has been our wonderful guest, Angela Wagner. Thank you so much for joining me again on the Payroll Podcast.
Thank you for having me, Nick. This was great.
This episode of the Payroll Podcast is sponsored by Deel, the all-in-one global people platform that simplifies how you pay your entire global team. Deel has commissioned Forrester Consulting to bring us the latest insights on the state of global payroll. Over 300 HR and finance leaders from around the globe were surveyed, shedding light on their challenges, what's working for them, and their must-haves for the future. Did you know that 85% of survey professionals anticipated that their payroll costs will increase in the next year due to hidden costs? A unified global payroll solution like Deel can save these businesses time and money with reduced costs, no hidden fees, and a total compliance guarantee. You can download the latest Forrester study now to learn how fragmented global payroll systems are impacting businesses, and why a unified global payroll platform like Deel can streamline the entire operation. Click the link in the show notes to download the study. And thanks again to Deel, that's Deel, for sponsoring today's episode of the Payroll Podcast.